Just how does a tragedy bring out scammers from everywhere? In the early hours of June 14, 2017, a devastating fire engulfed the 23-story residential block tower, Grenfell Tower, making it one of the UK's worst disasters. The fire originated in a refrigerator on the 4th floor, waking up the occupant. He contacted the fire department and they arrived minutes later. However, the flames had already started spreading rapidly and were surging up the tower's exterior. Compounding the tragedy was the stay put policy, which was intended to contain a fire to a single unit. Residents were instructed to remain in their apartments, unaware that the fire would spread. As smoke filled the narrow stairwell, many became trapped, unable to escape the thick fumes. The fire's rapid spread was partially due to the presence of external cladding, a significant component of Grenfell Tower's refurbishment. The cladding, consisting of aluminum sheets bonded to a central polyethylene core, played a central role in the fire spread. The material, highly combustible, melted and dripped, releasing a tremendous amount of energy. The victims of the Grenfell Tower fire spanned a wide range of ages and backgrounds. They included entire families, such as the Shakir and Hashim families, who resided on the upper floors, and the Elawabi family on the 21st floor. The youngest victim was 6-month-old Lena Belkadi, who tragically perished in her mother's arms. The oldest victim, Sheila, an 84-year-old resident, had lived there for 34 years. 77 people perished in the blaze. In the aftermath of the fire, the Grenfell Tower Fund was established to provide assistance to survivors, the bereaved, and the local community. Initially, grants totaling £5.2 million were distributed to aid those affected by the fire. Over the subsequent years, additional funds amounted to £1.8 million were allocated to support local organizations and projects aimed at rebuilding and revitalizing the community. But even with a tragic event such as this one, it still brought out all the scammers. As of March 2020, there have been 21 people charged with fraud in relation to the tower fire. Let's get started with number 14, Abolaji, Onafui and Kouakou. Abolaji, Onafui and Kouakou each crafted their own schemes with calculated precision, but they both claimed some relationship to the same victim. Onafui fervently maintained that his beloved sister was Zainab Dean. She and her young son tragically lost their lives in the flames that devoured the tower on that fateful early morning. He claimed to have been present amidst the chaos, personally grappling with the horrifying ordeal. But as the layers of truth were peeled away, a contrasting reality emerged. Apparently, Onafui was nowhere even near the vicinity of Grenfell Tower when the inferno started. Actually, he was in the comfort of a hotel during the blaze and had no relation whatsoever to Dean. But he still was able to get his hands on relief money. So, with all that cash in hand, Onafui indulged in shopping excursions at high-end stores like Harrods and Knightsbridge, as well as taking vacations and renting sports cars. He bragged on social media about things like his 245-pound slippers, while the Grenfell community continued to grapple with the weight of loss and suffering. However, the threads of Onafui's fabrications were finally unraveled when his cell phone records were examined. These digital footprints revealed the truth, exposing a trail of movements between various accommodations, such as hotels and hostels, during the time frame he vehemently professed his presence at Grenfell Tower. This revelation painted a portrait of a man who only cared about what he could get, exploiting the genuine suffering of victims and survivors for personal gain. As the courtroom drama unfolded, the true magnitude of Onafui's deceit came into light. The proceedings descended into disarray as his first lawyer quit due to the professional embarrassment, whatever that means, and his lies started to crumble under scrutiny. Onafui eventually admitted that his story was fake, but that it was only because he was hallucinating as a result of a fast when talking to police, and therefore unintentional. He then claimed that he was a model of the community, despite evidence of opening a new bank account registered to an address in the tower to get his hands on the money. The jury didn't buy what he was selling either, choosing to jail Onafui for 5 years for his stolen £35,000. Kouakou's actions bore striking similarities to Onafui's. Kouakou, a former hospital worker, fabricated claims regarding his relationship to Zainab Dean, asserting that they shared a dwelling in apartment 115 of Grenfell Tower. However, his narrative deviated slightly from Onafui's, highlighting a romantic connection instead of a sibling bond. Kouakou cunningly managed to swindle £30,000 in handouts from the Grenfell Victim Fund by peddling false information about his living arrangements. happened. He insisted he had been overseas in Ivory Coast when the fire ravaged the tower, watching the events unfold on TV. However, his alibi crumbled when flight manifests revealed that he had actually returned to the UK before the tragic incident occurred. Kouakou's plea and subsequent sentencing mirrored the gravity of his actions. Given the extent of his fraudulent behavior, the court acknowledged the need for a substantial sentence, and he was given 4 years. Number 13. Anh Nhu Nguyen. Anh Nhu Nguyen, a Vietnam-born serial fraudster, fabricated a heart-wrenching story claiming that his wife and son had perished in the devastating blaze. The audacity of his deception reached new heights when he shook hands with Prince Charles during his visit to a relief center. Nguyen's manipulation earned him a staggering £12,500 from charities and the Kensington and Chelsea Council. While Nguyen's criminal past, consisting of 17 aliases and 28 previous convictions, hinted at his propensity for fraud, it was his calculated exploitation of the tragedy that left the nation appalled. Taking advantage of the generosity of well-meaning volunteers, Nguyen received food, shelter, and financial assistance by falsely posing as a victim. Adding to the brazenness of his scheme, Nguyen sought the spotlight by appearing on television and sharing his harrowing tale of escape from the tower. He claimed to have lost everything, including his passport and identification. To further solidify his deceit, he even expressed his desire to bring family members from Hong Kong for the funerals of his purported wife and son. What made Nguyen's actions even more reprehensible was the fact that he embarked on his fraudulent scheme while on conditional release for a previous offense. His disregard for the law and the suffering of genuine victims was evident, as he callously diverted resources and attention away from those in dire need. During the trial, Nguyen's defense lawyer argued that his client had an exceptionally low IQ and suffered from untreated post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and limited empathy. However, these factors didn't absolve Nguyen for his responsibility of the deliberate exploitation of a tragedy for personal gain. Consequently, he was sentenced to 21 months in prison by Judge Philip Bartle, who denounced Nguyen's actions as contemptible. Number 12. Mohammed Saeed Rinku. Syed Rinku, a Bangladeshi illegal immigrant, stooped to unimaginable depths by fabricating a love affair with a male victim of the Grenfell Tower fire. His ploy aimed to not only defraud the disaster fund, but also secure his stay in the UK. Rinku's lies were uncovered when authorities questioned him about the alleged relationship. They discovered that he had meticulously researched the identities of those who had perished in the tragic blaze in order to pull off his con. The revelation of romantic videos with women and his use of dating apps looking for women on his phone further exposed his fraudulent scheme. As part of his deceit, Rinku managed to obtain a prepaid credit card funded by the disaster fund and spent a total of £5,070. Moreover, he received medical assistance from the NHS that was meant for genuine survivors of the fire, exploiting the policy created by the authorities, which aimed to assist individuals with insecure immigration status who had lost their homes. Rinku also sought to regularize his stay in the UK. Judge Nicholas Wood condemned Rinku's actions as despicable, beyond contempt, and beneath criticism before sentencing him to 18 months. Rinku's previous good character served as the sole mitigating factor, and while the judge acknowledged his apologies, it remained uncertain whether they would be accepted by others. Alongside his prison sentence, Rinku was ordered to pay £4,044 in compensation to the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. Number 11. Elaine Douglas and Tommy Brooks. Elaine Douglas and Tommy Brooks, both 51, claimed money intended for victims of the fire, despite not being affected by it. The most ridiculous aspect of this case is that the apartment they claim to have lived in during the fire didn't even exist. It's, of course, a despicable act to exploit a tragedy for personal gain, especially when so many people genuinely suffered and lost their lives. Furthermore, Douglas and Brooks also attempted to take advantage of the immigration policy introduced after the fire, which allowed residents who lost their homes to regularize their stay in the country. The couple claimed to have been residing in Grenfell Tower and were granted leave to remain for 5 years. Elaine Douglas stayed at the Radisson Blu in Kensington for 276 nights, costing the council over £55,000. She also accumulated charges of over £11,000 on a prepaid credit card provided to her after she had the nerve to complain about the food in the hotel. Brooks, on the other hand, spent 243 nights in hotel accommodations, amounting to more than £49,000. The guilty pleas from both defendants at Isleworth Crown Court highlight their actions, earning them 3 years apiece. Number 10. Joyce Sakari. Joyce Sakari claimed she had escaped the fire and had tragically lost her husband. However, it was revealed that she was single and living miles away. Her ruse involved various schemes, including claiming her sister-in-law had also perished in the blaze and getting a vulnerable man to pretend to be her husband, who was found miraculously living in a cave being fed by tourists. Sakari's story raised suspicions from the start when she was unable to provide specific details about her apartment number in the tower. Sakari also requested new caseworkers whenever she was questioned about her story, further complicating the investigation. Sakari took advantage of the situation by accumulating a vast amount of donations, literally filling a room at a Hilton hotel with the gifts and donations. As she received more support and material possessions, Sakari's attitude shifted and she became more confident and demanding. Her lies escalated, including fabricating stories about her husband and sister-in-law passing and pretending to recognize them in a video of the victims. Sakari couldn't resist the temptation of indulging in room service, ordering 3 meals when her social worker paid a visit. The third guest she claimed was living with her in the room was nothing more than a figment of her imagination. Sakari was also itching to snatch a new smartphone from the disaster fund. Even though she already had 3 phones, Joyce had the audacity to claim that she was merely holding one for a relative. And when she finally did get the new iPhone, her attitude improved to the point that care workers instantly became suspicious. The disaster fund's offer of free taxi rides also proved to be irresistible to Sakari. So she shamelessly used the service, treating it like her personal Uber. She even managed to accumulate a staggering £160 fare for a single ride. Her justification? She claimed that her traumatic experiences left her too stressed to utilize public transportation. Sakari had also portrayed herself as a qualified nurse, showcasing her alleged expertise in all things medical. However, upon closer examination, there was no concrete evidence to support her claim of having any occupation other than that of a heartless swindler. During the day of her trial, Sakari put on a perplexing act, pretending to be bewildered and spouting gibberish, which must have been crazy to see in person. She claimed that she couldn't enter pleas because she couldn't comprehend basic English words. Joyce also mastered the art of fabricating an extensive range of conditions, diseases, and ailments. One moment she was struck by sudden paralysis, confining her to a wheelchair, and the next, she said she was partially blind. While in custody, Sakari said she couldn't eat or swallow, only for staff to discover empty food containers in her room. Sakari was found guilty of multiple fraud charges, including defrauding the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, Hilton Hotel, and charities. She was also charged with possessing a false document and was sentenced to 4.5 years. Number 9. Mohammed Gamuta. Mohammed Gamuta claimed that his own father had passed away in the devastating blaze. He used his supposed tragedy as a means to secure a free hotel stay and some cash. Gamuta's plan aimed to net nearly £7,000, but he ended up only getting a mere £500 in cash, £910 in hotel bills, and £374 in room service expenses. Gamuta told the council officials that he had been residing with his father on the 24th floor when the inferno engulfed the building. Exploiting the press coverage and the name of a deceased victim, Abdel Salam, Gamuta claimed that Mr. Salam was his father, but Salam had no connection to Gamuta at all. Police discovered when they interviewed Salam's grieving son while investigating the fraud. Gamuta pled guilty to 2 counts of fraud in London's Isleworth Crown Court, and he was met with a just punishment, 18-month jail sentence. Number 8. Sharif Elawabi. Sharif Elawabi, branded as the worst Grenfell fraudster, claimed £103,000 in benefits meant for victims of the tragedy. Elawabi masqueraded as a resident of Grenfell Tower's 21st floor alongside a family of 5 with whom he had very little connection. Through this fraud, Elawabi secured £300 per week, food expenses, and enjoyed the comforts of 3 different hotels, all generously covered by the disaster fund. But his unruly behavior and blatant disregard for rules eventually got him kicked out of the 2 hotels. Elawabi's claim not only betrayed the trust of the community, but also caused further anguish for the genuine victims. He attempted to exploit the outpouring of sympathy and support that followed the tragedy, aiming to secure payment, property advantages, and financial benefits totaling £100,000. In his claim, Elawabi said that he was living with the El-Wahabi family, including Yassin El-Wahabi, 20, and his father, Abdulaziz El-Wahabi, 52, both of whom whom tragically lost their lives. However, Elawabi had no direct familial connection to them, despite knowing one of the children. Elawabi told council workers that he was outside the tower breaking his Ramadan fast at the time of the blaze, and that he tried to get back inside the tower while it was on fire, but was stopped by police. Moreover, Elawabi's criminal past was marked by a previous conviction in 2005 for possessing stolen pictures of Will Young in drag, which he planned to sell to the press. This history of exploiting opportunities for personal gain showed his relentless pursuit of the illicit profits, regardless of the consequences. In total, he had 28 prior convictions. Judge Robinson Johnson, in delivering the sentence, condemned his attempt to enrich himself while others were still grappling with the aftermath of the tragedy. The judge highlighted the immense pain suffered by the victim's family and friends, emphasizing that such profound loss and grief cannot be understood by those not directly affected. Elawabi was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Number 7. Abdel Kareem Rakaya. Abdel Kareem Rakaya, a Tunisian illegal immigrant, swindled 88,000 pounds from the Grenfell Fund. He claimed to be a victim of the fire and took advantage of the policy of granting amnesty to migrants affected by the disaster. Rakaya initially said that he had been staying in apartment 4, but later changed the story, claiming he had been sleeping in the stairwell. His scheme began at the Westway Support Center, where he sought assistance and portrayed himself as a survivor. He was provided with 209 nights of emergency hotel accommodation at Park Plaza County Hotel, costing a staggering £60,401. Following that, Rakaya was given a studio apartment in Chelsea for 6 months, which amounted to £15,895, including £3,166 worth of furniture, electrical goods, and bills. He also received additional payments totaling £11,885, along with monthly travel cards. The audacity of Rakaya's story became clear when he actually inquired whether his Netflix subscription was covered by the funds. When a housing officer raised suspicions about Rakaya's claim, he threatened legal action to intimidate the council into continuing to pay while an investigation was conducted. But the truth finally came to light, and Rakaya was arrested at his home, where £2,000 in cash was discovered. In court, Rakaya admitted to fraud by false representation and obtaining leave to stay in the country through deception. His defense claimed that he had experienced trauma and turned to alcohol and illegal substances since arriving in the UK. They also argued that witnessing the Grenfell Tower from the outside of the building had left him traumatized. The judge condemned Rakaya for exploiting the situation and sentenced him to 4.5 years in prison. Number 6. Antonio Gouveia. Antonio Gouveia was a cleaner who claimed he was residing in a flat with an elderly woman. However, this turned out to be a complete fabrication. Gouveia pocketed over £53,000 and resided in a luxurious hotel in Marylebone, paying £155 per night for a staggering 289 days. Not only did he enjoy lavish accommodations, but he also took cash handouts and food. Additionally, he stayed at another hotel, which cost £44,795 and obtained money and a free laptop from a charity. During the court proceedings, Gouveia pleaded guilty to 2 counts of fraud by false representation. His lawyer said that Gouveia had been homeless for 8 months before the fire and argued that his actions were driven by desperation. According to her, he wasn't a hardened criminal, but a desperate individual. Nevertheless, the judge denounced Gouveia's behavior, highlighting the profound sympathy and genuine concern demonstrated by most people in the aftermath of the Grenfell tragedy. Gouveia was sentenced to 3 years and 2 months in prison. Number 5. Daniel Stevenson. Daniel Stevenson claimed that he resided in the tower with a genuine tenant who tragically perished in the devastating blaze. He said that he'd been made homeless by the fire and sought various forms of support, including housing, services, and financial assistance, totaling £75,225. While the fire was happening, Stevenson was working as a pharmacist technician at a hospital in West London. During the period of his bogus claims, he resided in the comfort of the Mercure Kensington Hotel, with all expenses paid for by the Kensington and Chelsea Council. Stevenson received £54,099 for hotel costs, £14,310 as a food allowance, and an additional £6,876 in bank payments, totaling £75,285 between August 2017 and May 2018. What's interesting is that nobody that lived in the tower had ever seen or heard of him. Daniel was eventually sentenced to 3 years and 6 months in prison. However, the scars left behind will forever stain the grieving process and remind the victims of the lengths some would go to exploit their pain. Number 4. Jenny McDonough. Jenny McDonough was a senior finance officer for the charity organization dedicated to assisting victims of the fire and thus was entrusted with a great responsibility. However, she used her position to steal a staggering amount of money, leaving her victims devastated and questioning the very system that was meant to support them. Over the course of several years, McDonough managed to steal an estimated £62,000 from the funds allocated for the victims of the tragedy. Instead of fulfilling her duty to aid these victims, McDonough heartlessly took advantage of their misfortune and further deepened their suffering. That makes McDonough's actions all the more outrageous is how she spent the stolen money. Rather than quietly enjoying the ill-gotten gains or making subtle lifestyle upgrades, she indulged in extravagance that bordered on the absurd. Reports reveal that McDonough spent a significant portion of the stolen funds on luxurious vacations, including flights to Paris, Reykjavik, Los Angeles, and Dubai. She also spent £32,000 of the stolen money gambling and lost around $16,000. Her reckless choices demonstrated a complete lack of empathy and an appalling disregard for the lives meant to be assisting. Adding to the shocking nature of McDonough's betrayal was her complete disregard for the consequences of her actions. When confronted with the evidence of her fraudulent activities, she was advised to resign from her position. However, she callously ignored this advice and continued her criminal behavior. In a deeply disturbing turn of events, McDonough even stooped so low as to steal prepaid cards intended for the victims of the Grenfell Tower fire. Astonishingly, she recharged one victim's card 17 times, allowing more than £50,000 to flow through that account. Even after her arrest on August 1st, McDonough persisted in using another remaining credit card to continue her reckless spending spree. McDonough indulged in a series of extravagant purchases that boggle the mind. Beyond luxurious vacations, her extravagant taste led her to splurge over £500 at high-end hair salons, £185 on a pair of Ralph Lauren glasses, and even squandered £110 at a lavish lobster restaurant. Perhaps the most astounding aspect of McDonough's scheme was its sheer sloppiness. Despite her intentions to remain undetected, she displayed a stunning lack of foresight and attention to detail. Her activities left a clear trail of evidence that ultimately led to her downfall. McDonough underestimated the diligence of her colleagues and the auditors responsible for monitoring the charity's finances. Her actions weren't only morally reprehensible, but also highlighted her arrogance and poor judgment. Thankfully, justice prevailed in the case of Jenny McDonough. Following a thorough investigation, she was charged with fraud, forgery, and theft. In 2018, McDonough pleaded guilty to her crimes and was sentenced to 5.5 years in prison. Number 3. Derek Peters. Derek Peters claimed he lost his friend and all his possessions in the fire. He managed to get a room at the Park Grand Hotel in Paddington, where, during his stay, he ran up a bill of £40,000 and spent more than £5,000 on food, drinks, and laundry. However, Peters' criminal activities didn't end there. Derek was arrested for burglary, having stolen valuable items, including a tag watch, jewelry, a passport, an Apple laptop, and a Bose speaker from a neighboring apartment. Yet somehow, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea continued to pay for his hotel room while he was incarcerated. Even then, Peters managed to manipulate the judge during his sentencing. The sympathetic judge, moved by the supposed tragedy Peters had endured, spared him a prison sentence. This leniency allowed Peters to continue his deception and even led to him being offered an apartment. Ultimately, the truth caught up with Peters when a Grenfell survivor, Rebecca Ross, confirmed that he had never resided with her or her family as he had claimed. Further investigation into Peters' background revealed a long rap sheet with 40 convictions for 90 offenses, including 24 counts of fraud and 73 counts of theft. His history painted a picture of a cold criminal who repeatedly took advantage of others. As a result of his crimes, Peters was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Additionally, Peters was resentenced for the burglary charge, facing the consequences of both his fraudulent claims and his criminal activity. Number 2. Yanatan Eob. Yanatan Eob, a young man who described himself as homeless but used an address in Notting Hill, West London, took advantage of the tragedy to get rich. Eob's deceit involved receiving substantial funds and accommodations meant for the victims of the Grenfell Tower fire. He was provided with a hotel room, a food allowance, and prepaid cards totaling almost £87,000. However, his fraudulent activities didn't stop there. When authorities searched his hotel room, they discovered illegal substances as well as 7 mobile phones phones, approximately 3,000 pounds in cash, designer clothes, jewelry, and credit card. It became apparent that Eob wasn't only involved in fraudulent claims, but also engaged in dealing. Eob's claim was centered around how he allegedly lived with a friend in apartment 182, a residence that tragically housed a family of 5 who all perished in the fire. He was granted emergency accommodation at the Holland Park Hilton between July 2017 and June 2018, during which time he made various complaints. Eob brazenly requested more money, claiming difficulty in consuming the food provided at the hotel. Additionally, he complained about the hotel's Wi-Fi signal, stating that it hindered his ability to study. These complaints were made despite Eob's illicit activities and the luxury he was enjoying, including the use of a white convertible Mercedes. Eob's fraudulent activities were exposed when authorities found incriminating evidence in his hotel room, including dealing-related text messages and a list of names and numbers. The court recognized the severity of Eob's actions, acknowledging the impact they had on the bereaved survivors and the wider community affected by the Grenfell Tower fire. Judge Giles Curtis Rowley described the fire as a national disaster that shocked the nation, emphasizing that Eob had taken advantage of the demise of innocent people and the funds designated for their support. As a result, Eob was sentenced to 3 years and 4 months for fraud by false representation and an additional 3 years and 4 months for possession of contraband with intent to supply. If you're enjoying this story, be sure to stay right here for our past release on how this corrupt mayor left an entire city worse off with his crimes. Number 1. Moses Etienne. Moses Etienne claimed to have been residing in Grenfell Tower, and he used this lie to collect nearly 50,000 pounds. His elaborate story, including providing a non-existent address to authorities in order to get a hotel and living expenses in London. To further cover his tracks, Etienne made up a story about being an undercover government agent involved in top-secret work with foreign governments on renewable energy. He refused to disclose details about his fictitious apartment, claiming that he was bound to secrecy due to the nature of his work. Etienne even tried to say he had diplomatic immunity because he was associated with the U.S. mission in Geneva. However, investigations revealed that he had no diplomatic status in the UK, and he actually worked at a stall selling secondhand vintage clothing. During his trial, Etienne doubled down on his claims of being an undercover agent, stating that he was uncertain if his collection of secret files had been destroyed in the fire. This line of defense aimed to create doubt and sympathy, but it was ultimately exposed as another fabrication. The Metropolitan Police revealed that Etienne had moved out of Grenfell Tower several years before the fire, and the apartment number he provided didn't exist. Despite his attempts to maintain the facade, Etienne was convicted of fraud and was handed a 5-year prison sentence for his deceitful scheme. Carlita Kilpatrick was Detroit's first lady, as wife of then Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick. One late night, she came back to one of the infamous after-parties at her home, which was the famous McDonough mansion, the mayor of Detroit's official residence. She came home early to find Kilpatrick, let's just call it, appreciating the art of dancing by a woman that wasn't Mrs. Kilpatrick. Carlita was definitely less appreciative of the skill involved, reacted like you would any reasonable wife would react, by grabbing a blunt object rumored to have been a chair leg and then going after Kwame and the dancer. Kwame Kilpatrick wasn't a politician strictly because it was his idea. That's because politics is the family business. His mom is Michigan politician Carolyn Kilpatrick. She spent most of her career as a favorite among voters. In 1979, she became a member of the Michigan House of Representatives. Her popularity spanned 6 re-elections, and during election time, she never dropped below 80% of the vote. In 2004, she had no major party opposition, and in 2006, she was completely unopposed. By the time 2010 arrived, she was re-challenged in the Democratic primary. However, her 2010 campaign was different. She was asked fewer questions about her policies and more about the countless scandals surrounding her son, Kwame, such as the story we just told you getting out in the paper. Because outraged voters could no longer separate her actions from the scandalous ones of her son, Kwame, she was now out of a job. Kwame's record seemed more like the record of a career criminal instead of a career politician. Kwame Kilpatrick was born in Detroit, Michigan on June 8, 1970. His mother was a politician, and his father was a semi-professional basketball player and a politician as well. He was just 9 years old when his mother, Carolyn, began representing Detroit in the Michigan House of Representatives. His father, Bernard Kilpatrick, served as head of Wayne County Health and Human Services Department and as chief of staff to Edward H. McNamara. Following in his parents' footsteps, Kwame got his bachelor's degree in political science from Florida A&M University in 1992. He married his wife, Carlita in 1995, and the pair had 3 children. In 1996, his mother vacated her seat at the Michigan House of Representatives, making way for Kwame, who was elected as her replacement. From there, Kwame was elected minority floor leader for the Michigan Democratic Party and was the first African American to hold the position of House Minority Leader in 2001. At 31, Kilpatrick was the youngest ever mayor of Detroit when he was elected in 2001. He was youthful and full of ideas. It just so happened that his ideas tended to benefit him more than the city. From the very start of Kwame's term, Detroit was plagued with a growing deficit. So, Kwame's quick solution was to simply close the beloved Belle Isle Aquarium and the Belle Isle Zoo. The city's deficit meant he had to make cuts from somewhere if he was going to free up any money. But the decision was so unpopular that the city council overruled him and actually increased funding. However, that growing deficit may have been contributed to by Kilpatrick himself when he leased a Lincoln Navigator for his family using city funds, and when he charged thousands of dollars for spa massages, and when he ate extravagant meals at high-end restaurants, and when he bought pricey bottles of wine, and when he charged all of that to his city credit card. Unlike his mother, Kwame was so unpopular that Time magazine actually named him one of the worst mayors in America. Diamond Joe Quimby never even got that title. The lore surrounding the McDonough Mansion Party would later be a defining part of Kwame's career. The urban legend is that a huge, raucous party broke out inside the McDonough Mansion, as we had mentioned at the beginning of the video. To quickly recap, then Detroit First Lady Carlita came home early to find Kwame appreciating the art of the dance in a very up-close and personal way. Carlita, less appreciative of the skill involved, reacted like you would expect someone from Detroit to react, by grabbing a blunt object, rumored to have been a chair leg, and attacked the dancer. The Attorney General at the time, Mike Cox, investigated the party and denied claims that it ever happened. Rumors spread throughout the city that Cox was covering up for Kwame because he was at the party too. There's a lot of jokes here that we're just not going to make. We'll just leave it at Kwame had Cox in the palm of his hand. The public didn't find out about the 2002 event until May 2003, when Kwame fired Deputy Chief Gary Brown after an investigation into indiscretions by the mayor's security detail. This prompted Brown to release a memo where he accused Kwame's bodyguards of misconduct and the aforementioned party. The dancer that got into the fight with Kwame's wife was Tamara Greene, also known as Strawberry, a 27-year-old mother of 3. 2 men had to step in and physically restrain Carlita at that time. In the early morning of April 30th, 2003, a few months after the alleged party, Greene was sitting at an intersection with her boyfriend. Greene was about to drop him off when someone shot into the car in an apparent drive-by. The pistol was the same one used by the Detroit Police Department at the time. Before her passing, Greene spoke about the McDonough Mansion party, and her family was sure her murder was to stop her from testifying about it. There was plenty of evidence that the assault happened. 3 paramedics signed affidavits concerning the incident. One of those paramedics admitted to seeing Kwame and his bodyguards at the hospital where Greene was being treated. Another paramedic saw an injured woman who said she was attacked by Kwame's wife. Strangely, however, any evidence of Greene ever being treated at any hospital that night had vanished, and local hospitals deny having ever treated her. The family's attorney, Norman Yatuma, struggled to access information from authorities regarding the murder. Evidence pointed towards it being a member of the police department, but his investigation was sabotaged by authorities. Dirty cop's gonna dirty cop. No tipster or witness wanted to come forward as they were too frightened of retribution. The judge ultimately dismissed the suit over lack of evidence. Yatuma offered $100,000 for any information about the case, but it remains unsolved. Despite his best efforts, Kwame just couldn't keep himself out of trouble. Allegations of abuse of power started when an influential Baptist Baptist minister, was arrested after soliciting a prostitute, and Kwame used his power to get him out of trouble. Antoinette Bostic was the arresting officer and received multiple phone calls from the mayor and police chief persuading her not to show up at court so the case would be dismissed. Kwame funneled money from Michigan legislature's state grants to two companies with barely any information in their project descriptions. One was called Unite, owned by his wife Carlita, who was the organization's sole employee that received $175,000. The other was Detroit 3D, a company that wouldn't give details on how it was spending its funds, so not at all suspicious. Kwame cut thousands of city jobs, but found jobs for friends and family members despite their lack of experience. Their average annual salary increases were 36% rather than the 2% that the rest of the city workers received. Kilpatrick was hit with a slander suit relating to a 2004 incident when police pulled over Christine Beatty, his chief of staff, for speeding. She was furious, scolding officers who she made clear should have known who she was, because that always works with the police when they pull you over. Officers claimed Beatty called the chief of police directly to have the officers called off, which they were. The incident leaked to the media, and the chief said Beatty was harassed, and Kwame implied that she was set up. The whistleblower trial began in August 2007 after Kwame's ex-bodyguard Harold Nelthorpe and Deputy Police Chief Gary Brown were fired during an internal probe into the mayor's actions. After 3 hours of deliberation, the plaintiffs were awarded $6.5 million in damages. Kwame said he'd appeal the verdict, but approved an $8.4 million settlement a few weeks later, when he discovered that lawyer Mike Stefani had evidence that he and Beatty committed perjury during their deposition. The city council voted to pay the lawsuit that involved Nelthorpe, Brown, and a third officer from a separate case against Kwame. At the time, the city council had no idea of the confidentiality agreement that Kwame put in place, part of the settlement. The city council requested that all documents used in the suit be unsealed. Mike Stefani was deposed and revealed the existence of the confidentiality agreement that was supposed to keep intimate texts sent between Kwame and Beatty private. If those involved told anyone about the agreement, they would forfeit the $8.4 million settlement. Kilpatrick and Beatty were charged with obstruction of justice, conspiracy, misconduct in office, and perjury. The city council requested Kwame resign, but he refused. The text message scandal revealed that Kwame and Beatty, both married at the time, were in the midst of an affair. They admitted in their texts to using city funds for romantic getaways, and the text contained evidence about them conspiring to fire Brown. Beatty quickly resigned, but Kwame wasn't as easy to get rid of. The city council passed a resolution asking for Kwame to resign with a vote of 7-1 that also contained 33 reasons he should step down. Kwame did not comply, saying he wouldn't leave and that the vote was irrelevant. In March 2008, Kwame was charged with 8 felonies and Beatty with 7. Kwame pleaded guilty to 2 counts of obstruction and no contest to assaulting a deputy. He finally resigned as mayor. Kwame showed no signs of humility during the trial, acting cocky and insincere. Judge David Groner sentenced him to 4 months in jail, as well as restitutions for the sex and text scandal, and an additional 120-day sentence for assaulting a sheriff's officer in an unrelated incident. Much to the judge's disgust, Kwame snickered while he was being sentenced, clearly not taking the proceedings seriously. Kwame didn't receive special treatment in jail, but after serving 99 days, he was released. Immediately afterwards, he boarded a private jet headed for Texas, where he joined his family in their $3,000 a month rental home. Kwame told Judge Groner that he only made $3,000 a month for restitution payments, prompting Groner to request his financial records. Kwame was back on the stand to justify his claims of poverty. His financial records told a different story. He owned a $1 million home, frequently made lavish purchases, and owned more than 1 Cadillac Escalade. When questioned, Kwame amusingly pretended to not know who paid for all of those things. The court learned that the true source of his money was from business leaders in Detroit who paid Kwame a substantial amount to get him to resign as mayor and plead guilty. Judge Groner then ordered Kwame to pay $300,000 to the city of Detroit. Kwame missed his first restitution payment of $79,000, only paying the court $14,000, then an extra $21,175 a few days later. However, this meant Kwame had violated the terms of his probation, and Groner approved a warrant. Kwame was sentenced to 1.5 to 5 years in prison and was indicted on new corruption charges. Kilpatrick lobbied for a transfer from the Oaks Correctional Facility and bounced around facilities before he was eventually released in August 2011, a little over a year after being sentenced. Kwame's next trial was in September 2012 for fraudulent schemes where he awarded contracts to the city's Department of Water and Sewage. During that time, he was also suspected of pocketing nearly $1 million in kickbacks. The prosecution had many witnesses that spoke out against Kwame, and the others accused, including his father. Kwame was found guilty on 24 counts, including extortion, mail fraud, tax evasion, extortion, and many others. The judge sentenced him to 28 years in prison. He didn't have the option for parole as he was arrested in the federal prison system, serving his sentence in a federal correctional institution. Kilpatrick appealed the decision, but the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit upheld his convictions, and the Supreme Court denied his appeal, but he'd been mentioned in an Eminem song that year, so, you know, silver lining and all that. Desperate, Kwame turned to none other than President Donald Trump for help. With 12 hours left in office, President Trump commuted Kwame's sentence. The White House statement about the commutation mentioned that he'd used his prison time to teach public speaking and led Bible study groups. Obviously, the only needed criteria for any sort of commutation. However, the commutation of his sentence didn't erase his conviction, and Kwame can't run for office until 2033, 20 years after his conviction. Detroit, sadly, is going to have to find someone else to run things. As of June 2022, Kwame and his current wife asked the public to help them in a crowdfunding campaign for what was titled Baby Fund, as the happy couple has just welcomed a new child. It had a reasonable goal of $800,000 and included less stuff about babies and more stuff about a luxury home and a gated community. You know, the kind of thing most people use crowdfunding for. But their humble dreams of a new luxury house paid for by people who thought they were helping a baby were short-lived. Kwame still owed a large amount of money to the city of Detroit. When authorities discovered the campaign, the crowdfunding account was tragically seized. It's unclear if he will run for office in 2033 when he's legally able. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comments section whether or not you think a scam on a charity should deserve a bigger penalty than usual.